I think my suicide attempts started around 8. I thought, if I'm gonna be around drunk people or people molesting me or people raping me, I just want to leave. I'd rather have strangers do that to me than rather my family. I was about, I would say, 6 years old when I first started being molested, but I also was physically and emotionally and mentally abused. I just wanted my pain to stop.
This is Caroline. Caroline is one of the many Indigenous women who are coming forward with their stories of abuse that they didn't know how to report at the time or they didn't feel like they could.
I was being molested by several people, about 5 extended family members. They would come and bring wine, bring beer to my family, to my mother and father, and they would get them drunk and get them to pass out so they could have their way with me. And I was more scared to tell my mom. I was more scared to tell them than anything, so I always kept it to myself. I was mad at my parents too for a while because I thought, why didn't you teach me this? Why didn't you teach me to be safe? And why didn't you teach me about sexual abuse and domestic violence? Well, there was no words for it. Their best way at the time was to be silent, to not bring attention to yourself, because then you might get hurt worse. I didn't know that was a coping skill that they had to use because there was no programs back then.
The old official statistics from the United States Department of Justice were that 1 in 3 American Indian Alaska Native women were survivors of sexual violence. Recent information that was published by the federal government indicates that more than 50% are survivors of sexual violence and sexual abuse. And as surprising as that statistic sounds, it's actually much worse. When we go into communities and we ask law enforcement, prosecutors, judges, nurses, grandmas, what do you think the percentage of people are in your community that have been raped? And the answer that we most commonly get is somewhere between 80 and 90%.
The violence that currently exists against our people, against our Native women, our children, our elders, it all goes back to trauma, I believe. The trauma that we suffered, the historical trauma, the oppression, taking of our lands, the raping of our women. And this happens throughout Indian country, this whole land that we now call America.
Their idea was to remove us water, gold, copper, they saw the land, they want the land.
But the violence didn't stop when the land was taken. The effects of it are still being felt to this day by the entire people group.
When you think about Native women, a lot of that goes back to how we were treated and how we were beaten and how we were raped, and then now trying to restore just get back, who we were as Indigenous people. We are not seen as human. We are not seen as still alive in this generation. We are seen as in museums. We are glorified in movies. We are the Pocahontases of the cartoon. But they don't view us as human, as valuable. And our Native women are therefore then just, they're not worth the effort.
Say if a young lady comes to me within 5 days and she says, I was just raped, I can get the swabs and start swabbing her. That's the population we want to hit, with the ones that are afraid to go to the police department, either because they have their own issues with the legal system, and for us it's just volunteer. We don't get paid to do this. We just volunteer to help them go through the process if they choose to.
Caroline has used her story to help empower other women to share their own. One woman who has been helped by her work and who wishes to remain anonymous in order to speak candidly spoke to us about her childhood.
Being a survivor of
sexual molestation. I grew up thinking that I was an object rather than a person. It took away my self-worth, who I was as a woman, and instilled a lot of fear and insecurity in the world. No more shaming, no more blaming, no more judgment. That's what really needs to take place.
To this day, I love my mom, and I can just imagine what they suffered, her and my grandma. Because there was nobody for them at all. There's people for me now, today, but there was nobody for them. They didn't have a program, they didn't have a law, they didn't have nothing. But I see our elders, and I thank them so much for surviving so that we could be here, so that we could fight for our children and our grandchildren.